Late Friday night, President Trump stepped into murky legal waters after firing at least 17 inspectors general in the federal government. The massive firing sweep has caused outrage among Democrats, who quickly slammed the move as illegal. Federal law requires the president to notify both chambers of Congress of an inspector general firing at least 30 days in advance, which Trump did not seemingly do.
This is a chilling purge, and it's a preview of the lawless approach Donald Trump and his administration are taking far too often as he's becoming president.
The purge is likely to result in legal challenges, the latest example of Trump testing the bounds of what he can do in the White House. Joining me now is the Hill's national political reporter, Julia Manchester. Julia, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Michael.
I want to get to first to one of those inspector general responses. Mike Ware, he wrote a letter to the White House saying, if you want to do what you're doing, I recommend you reach out to the White House legal counsel. What are the legal challenges here? And first off, what agencies were impacted with this?
Look, we're seeing a number of agencies, the State Department, for example, the list goes on. We know that the Department of Justice was not impacted. Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General there, still has a job. But look, getting quite a bit of backlash from Democrats, essentially saying this is setting a bad precedent. This was illegal. They didn't give Congress 30 days notice. But it's important to point out that Republicans are very much defending this move, pointing back to the Reagan administration, saying it had been done before. We know that in an email sent to one of these agencies obtained by ABC News, changing priorities were cited as the reason for this. Republicans argue that these inspector generals have become less independent and more so protecting the agency. So expect a big fight to come out of this.
Yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa. He's one of the strongest defenders of inspectors general up on Capitol Hill. Curious to see how he reacts to this. Let's change gears quickly. I want to turn to the Pentagon because it officially has a new secretary this week, that being Pete Hegseth, following his confirmation vote late Friday night. He gave a preview of the additional executive orders that we're going to see Trump sign this week. Let's take a listen.
There are more executive orders coming that we fully support on removing DEI inside the Pentagon, reinstating troops who were pushed out because of COVID mandates, Iron Dome for America. This is happening quickly.
We're also expecting, Julia, these executive orders to include banning transgender individuals from the military. How many people can be impacted with that? And what else do we know about the scope of these executive orders?
Well, I mean, we could expect hundreds, potentially, close to 1,000 people over that number impacted. But the scope of these executive orders seems very large. And it seems that with the Pentagon in particular, the Trump administration is zeroing in particularly on these cultural issues, transgender individuals in the military. People have been pushed out because of COVID mandates. And I think there is a lot of questions as to how Pete Hegseth will be a leader of the Defense Department when it comes to actual defense policy and foreign policy. It seems like right now they want to clean house in their own way, sort of reorganize it in the way they see it, he sees fit. But it's unclear what he's going to look like as the head of probably arguably the largest bureaucracy in the world.
Yeah, let's travel south now. House Republicans are gathering at Trump's Doral property in Miami to have their annual retreat. President Trump is going to make an appearance, I'm told, for dinner tonight, Monday night. What's on the table? What's on the docket, the agenda for House Republicans as they gather? And talk about how high the stakes are. This is sort of seen as a planning meeting.
Yeah.
Things are going to get difficult from here up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, well, as you know, Michael, this is very much Speaker Johnson's, opportunity to create a blueprint as to how to, pass that big, beautiful bill that we've seen, that reconciliation bill. How does he, move forward with this bill while essentially trying to curry favor to all parts of the Republican conference and keeping that conference together? Remember, House Republicans have a very, very narrow majority. We know that Mike Johnson, there's some tension there with a number of these fiscal hawks. And on top of this, you have President Trump really being an overarching presence during this meeting. It's notable that this is being held at Doral, Trump National Club in Doral, Florida, outside of Miami. But it's unclear. Unclear what kind of role President Trump could play tonight when he meets with House Republicans. Will he be a listener? Will he be sort of a fly on the wall seeing what happens? Or is he going to to throw around his weight, because remember, this is his agenda at stake. And we've seen some of these fiscal hawks we've talked about have been willing to, potentially not buck the president's agenda, but, put their own priorities ahead of his in these negotiations.
Yeah, it's going to be a high stakes few days there in South Florida. I want to go back to the Senate. We mentioned Pete Hegseth's vote on Friday night, that tiebreaker that was needed from J.D. Vance to confirm him as Defense Secretary. On Saturday, we saw Kristi Noem be confirmed as DHS Secretary. The big lift now that's seen in the coming days is going to be Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's pick to serve as Director of National Intelligence. Her hearing is scheduled for Thursday. Lay out right now where Tulsi Gabbard stands in this confirmation hearing, this confirmation process. She's going to have that hearing on Thursday. But before hitting the full floor, she's going to have to face that vote in the Intelligence Committee. That is going to be difficult within itself.
And she can't afford to lose one vote there from a Republican. Our colleague Al Weaver has some good reporting out, essentially saying that, other senators have told him that her path is narrowing. You have people like Susan Collins, for example, who has proven to be a major swing vote in a number of these confirmations, saying she doesn't believe that Gabbard has necessarily changed her stance on something called 702, which is the Foreign Surveillance Act, which, about surveilling Americans.
Warrantless spying powers.
Yes, so there's, I think, a lot of questions, Democrats obviously, and some Republicans have, so she can't afford to lose a vote right now in a very narrowly divided committee. So she's really the one who's facing, I think, the most headwinds. But I would also keep an eye on RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We haven't heard him as much in the headlines as of late. I mean, he's still been in the news, but Gabbard seems to be the most vulnerable. But we do have some Republicans, like Mike Pence, for example. His outside group is running, ads against RFK Jr., citing his past stances on abortion. So he's facing pushback from some Democrats and potentially from Republicans.
Another one to watch this week also, Kash Patel for FBI Director. He's going to have his hearing. I want to talk about one more nominee before we let you go, Julia. Scott Bessent, Trump's pick to be Treasury Secretary. He was advanced over the weekend in a bipartisan vote. Final confirmation will be tonight at 5:30 p.m. Any issues there, or that'll be easy?
I think it will be one of the easier of the confirmations, nothing like Gabbard or RFK Jr., for example, but it's historic. I mean, he would be the first openly gay cabinet secretary confirmed by the Senate during a Republican administration. So that's, historic in itself. He's going to have, play a major role in implementing Trump's agenda, particularly on the economy when it comes to extending tax cuts and tariffs. Over the weekend, we saw that fight over potential tariffs with Colombia, for example. Expect Scott Bessent to be a major key player in a number of those discussions.
You brought up Colombia. I want to ask you really quickly on that. More weekend news. President Trump seemingly strong-armed the Colombian president into accepting these deportation flights of migrants that involved, as you mentioned, the threat of tariffs. Just tell us quickly what happened there and how that played out.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a whirlwind, because we've known that the Colombian government has, accepted these planes in the past, these, repatriation flights, if you will, 500, I think, over the past decade. But the Colombian president said they weren't accepting these because military aircraft from the U.S. was being used. He had concerns over the treatment of people on those planes. So essentially, you had Trump throwing his weight around, you had the Colombian president throwing his weight around, and then they came to an agreement. It was very important that they came to an agreement, though, Michael, because we know that Colombia is one of the U.S.'s key allies in South America, especially at a time when China is really trying to exert its influence in the region. Additionally, it's one of the few countries in that region that has a trade surplus with the U.S., so tariffs would have been bad news.
Another example of Trump using tariffs as a negotiating tactic. Julia Manchester, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael.
And in his first week back in office, President Trump made good on one of his top campaign promises, mass deportations. His administration kicked off nationwide immigration and customs enforcement raids. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley has the latest on the ICE roundups.
ICE officials say this weekend they made more than 1,200 arrests nationwide.
You can see the number steadily increase, the number of arrests nationwide as we open up the aperture. Right now it's concentrating public safety threats, national security threats.
But some Democrats say the administration's immigration dragnet is catching people it shouldn't.
We're seeing a kind of chaos in which, in contradiction of the president's commitment that he was going to start focused on violent criminals, they're just detaining anyone.
Border czar Tom Homan says being in the country illegally is a crime itself, regardless of what else a migrant here illegally has done.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table.
The White House published these announcements highlighting a handful of foreign nationals arrested for violent crimes, including these two, a Mexican and an El Salvadorian, picked up by ICE in L.A. The Trump administration is already using law enforcement agencies not normally involved in immigration operations, including the FBI, ATF, and DEA, all which assisted last week.
We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people. Donald Trump promised to do that.
But some critics say the effort contradicts one of the president's key campaign promises to bring down prices.
Mass deportations of farm workers in California, maybe half the workforce, are going to drive food prices through the roof.
The administration says the country's immigration laws must be enforced.
America should actually look out for the interests of our citizens first.
Trevor Shirley, thanks for your reporting. And shifting gears now, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians returned to Northern Gaza over the weekend. For many, it was the first time since Hamas's war with Israel began 15 months ago. The UN says more than 200,000 people were seen moving north in Gaza on Monday morning alone. It comes as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas stretches into a second week. Hamas has notified Israel that 8 of the hostages expected to be freed in the deal's first phase are dead. Israel believed at least 35 of the approximately 90 remaining hostages were dead. That's all for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Mychael Schnell. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.